Rock and roll, rock and roll, rock and roll. You know, I know everybody's complaining about they haven't had a haircut in like a year. They haven't had a hair dye. They need a trim. Just think about it. In the future, when everything's kind of back to sort of normal and, you know, we're all squeaky clean again and we're coiffed to within an inch of our lives, we're going to think back nostalgically to this time when we were wild. We rewilded ourselves. We let our hair grow long. And we're beautiful, man. You are beautiful. It's episode 49 of the Mistook for Swan emergency broadcasting system. It's a sunny day. It's still chilly, but it's sunny, so I'm optimistic. It is National Flapjack Day, and there's really nothing bad I can say about that. Go make yourself a stack of flapjacks and feel good about it. Pour a little sugar on it. Put a little maple syrup on it. Some jam. You know, I don't know. However you like it. Do it the way you like it. Make yourself happy. It's Townes Van Zant's birthday today. Troubled genius, Townes Van Zant. You should go listen to some Townes songs, and if that doesn't bum you out, I don't know what will. Anyway, it's going to be National Women's Day coming up. International Women's Day, and you know, we'll try and focus on some powerful women. It was just Valentina Tereshkova's birthday the other day. First woman in space, youngest woman in space. Spent 3 days orbiting the Earth. She had no experience as a pilot, but she was a very experienced parachutist. So I guess that qualified her. So I figured they figured, yeah, she's gonna have to jump out of that damn thing, that tin can sooner or later. So anyway, Valentina Tereshkova, my good buddy Keith Whitaker and I, we came up with a song about Valentina once. You know, I was just sitting around with a guitar. I started doing this droney chord, and just from his soul, he starts singing the song of Valentina Tereshkova. He actually recorded it later on, not with me, but with Stephen Davies. It's a cool song and a great subject. The fact that it's International Women's Day also means that it's coming up to John Bora's birthday. So, you know, John Bora recorded and produced the He Mistook for Swan album. So, Johnny, I know you're keeping busy during the plague. So you guys should check out what Johnny's doing. And other than that, since we're hanging around, we've been hanging around Greenwich Village last week, you know, with Dave Van Ronk, and I realize, you know, there's another guy we should talk about. You know, maybe not a super famous guy, but an important guy, and that's Fred Neal. Fred Neal, pretty cool dude. So let's just take a minute, see what's going on with Fred. All right, hang on. So Fred Neal, super interesting guy. So influential, but kind of one of those geniuses that most people have never heard of. If you know his name at all, it could be just because you know the song Everybody's Talking at Me, which was in the movie Midnight Cowboy, which was a huge hit, and it was recorded by Nilsson. That's Fred's song. But there's way more to Fred than this, and Fred is really like a pivotal figure in the folk scene in the early 60s. But he's hard to put in a box. It's hard to put Freddie in a box. He just won't fit. He has so many different influences and styles and talent that it's hard to know where he fits. And the other thing about Fred is that he's so intensely personal that he never gave any interviews. Apparently he gave one interview. This is what I've read, and I can't find it. So, I mean, he doesn't talk about himself, and he's allergic to success and publicity. So, how do we find out anything about Fred? Well, I guess we just look at the trail of the wreckage, okay? So he was born in Cleveland in 36, but his family almost immediately moved down to St. Pete's in Florida. So he's a Southern boy. Dig this, his dad had a great job. His dad was working for the Wurlitzer Jukebox Company. So his job was to drive around the southern states with a trunk full of records and to stuff the jukeboxes with the latest hits. And young Fred Neal would come along with Dad once in a while on these little jaunts. And so Fred has got this enormous knowledge of popular music right off the get-go, just from hanging out with his dad. And then he's doing all this traveling around the southern states. They figured out pretty early on that Fred had this amazing voice. So they stuck him in the gospel choir because he has this resonant baritone voice. And it's just amazing. And he's got great control, and he fit right in. So he has this great knowledge of Southern gospel music as well. Anyway, Fred grows up, as people do, and he digs this music business, so he sends off his resume, and he gets a job in the Brill Building. So the Brill Building in New York City on Broadway is ground zero of the business of music in America, okay? And it's the hit factory, right? It's where like Laura Nyro is, where Carole King is, where Burt Bacharach works there, Neil Diamond, Sonny Bono, and yes, Fred Neil's working there. I mean, it boggles the mind how this all works. Are they sitting at a desk with typewriters? I don't know how it works, but anyway, they're sitting there, and they're churning out hits. And Fred had some success. He wrote a hit for Roy Orbison, the song Candyman. He wrote some songs for Buddy Holly, and he actually got to know Buddy Holly and so, all those Texas guys pretty well. So he was hanging out with the stars of the day. At the same time, in New York City, there's this folk scene that is being created, that is growing from nothing. And all these blues artists who have been in retirement for decades are starting to come back out and play little clubs, like Sun House, Mississippi John Hurt, Reverend Gary Davis. These guys are playing around. The guys from the South, from the bluegrass and the country music world, who have been, just sitting on their back porches for years, they're starting to come around. There's so much energy. There's all these young people now want to come and they want to learn and hear folk music, and all these little clubs are springing up. And Fred's there in New York. He's churning out the hits, and he's fascinated, and he goes down and he wants to check it out, and he wants in. So he actually hooks up with a buddy, Vince Martin, and they form a little folk duo called Martin and Neal. They get a record contract and put out a record. So anyway, they have like kind of a minor hit with that. But at the same time, Fred Neil is writing these really cool, dark, interesting songs for himself. And he's going down to Greenwich Village and he starts playing these songs, mixed in with, some traditional folk songs, and, taking his own versions of stuff. And he's got this beautiful baritone voice. And it's like, it's mesmerizing. He's playing a big 12-string guitar, and he's got this kind of southern, kind of laid-back attitude that can just snap like that and get kind of angry in your face. And the New York City, East Coast boys, they're eating this shit up, and they love it, and it's amazing. So anyway, Fred's getting a name for himself, and before long, Fred is the top draw in the local clubs. He's the man. He is the top dog. And so everybody wants to play with him. And so one day somebody went up to the young John Sebastian, 18 years old, the guy who is going to be the leader of the Lovin' Spoonful, in a few years hence, and says, "Oh yeah, Fred's playing down at the club, and he needs a harp player. Can you fill in?" John Sebastian goes, "Oh yeah, duh, yeah, sure I do, because I love Fred, and it's a great opportunity for me to play in front of people. I'm just a kid." So he becomes Fred's kind of sidekick there. As he goes down there, he meets Felix Pappalardi. Felix Pappalardi is kind of also just a young guy on the scene, bumping around from one gig to another. He's so talented, playing all these different instruments, but he plays bass with Fred and John, and they get a little thing going on, and they start making quite the name for themselves, and Fred. So before you know it, people are just loving this stuff, and they're just to like round it off, the queen of the New York City folk scene, Odetta. She has a quote where she says, "There's only two people I've ever heard in my whole life whose voices could never be captured by a microphone. And those are Paul Robeson, the great African-American opera singer, social activist, just all around amazing man, and Fred Neal. And what she said about Fred Neal's voice was, it's a healing instrument. Fred Neal's voice is a healing instrument. Let's take a second and talk about Odetta. Odetta Holmes, born in Alabama, Birmingham, Alabama, 1930. Pretty early on, her folks realized that she had an amazing singing voice, and she got enrolled in a school for operatic training of her voice. She ended up doing a lot of different stuff. She did musical theater, she did film, she was playing the clubs in New York, playing the clubs in San Francisco, and she became very well known as a singer of gospels, spirituals, and American folk music. And more importantly, she became very well known as the voice of the civil rights movement. Yeah, she was the one on the front lines of those protests, singing the protest songs, raising the spirits, and being the voice of a generation. Martin Luther King Jr. called her the queen of American folk music, and she was. She influenced all those people. She influenced Bob Dylan. Joan Baez worshipped her. Mavis Staples. And other people like Janis Joplin. Janis Joplin had Odetta's records, and she just wanted to learn how that phrasing worked. She wanted to sing like that. So Odetta had a long and distinguished career. She played all over the world. She got all sorts of awards and accolades. But her very last gig was in Toronto at Hughes Room, and she died at the age of 77. So a long, illustrious, distinguished career, an amazing person, and we were lucky to have her here. So, Odetta, thank you very much. Back to the show. The first thing you need to understand about Fred is you don't understand. That's what John Sebastian said, and John knew Fred pretty damn well. Fred was such an intensely private, personal man. He would not share details of his life, and yet he was so open and generous and giving to his friends that everybody adored him. He was cantankerous. He was stubborn as a mule, like he would not change his ways when he thought he was right. And so he's just this ball of contradictions. He put out 5 records between 64 and 71. But 2 of them are legendary and really stand the test of time. So in 65, he put out Bleeker and Mcdougall. And that's really just, Bleeker and Mcdougall is the corner of Greenwich Village. So that's where it was all happening. It has a great cover photo. He's standing in the middle of the road with his guitar, and he's got that kind of sheepskin coat that Bob Dylan made famous later on. Yeah, it's just a great record. It's got Felix Pappalardi and John Sebastian on it, and this other guy Childs on electric guitar. Some people say it's the first folk rock album. It's got a pretty laid back feel to it, but so did some of those early kind of Buffalo Springfields and Crosby, Stills and Nash records too. So it's debatable. Anyway, it's a beautiful record, and it's got some of Fred's greatest songs. So it's got the song "A Little Bit of Rain," which is just such a kind of a sad, reminiscing kind of song, and he does this stunning vocal thing where he makes his baritone voice go even lower at the end of each line, and it's almost shocking, and it's just so beautiful. Karen Dalton did "A Little Bit of Rain" on her first album as well. He also did "Blues on the Ceiling," which Karen Dalton also did on her first album. Karen was a big fan of Fred's, and Fred was a big fan of Karen's. They were two difficult people. Karen's version of "Blues on the Ceiling," Fred said, she does it so incredibly, it's as if she wrote it herself. Like he was ready to say, okay, that song, it's yours. The other song that I'll mention off the first album was called "Other Side to This Life." I'll come back to that in a minute. So then Fred refuses to promote his album because Fred doesn't do that. And so he gets another record company, and they put out a second album in 67, just called Fred Neal. And he's got a bunch of cool songs. He does an Elizabeth Cotten cover, "I've Got a Secret," "Shake Sugaree," which maybe I'll try for you later on. he does this song called The Dolphins. More on that in a minute too. And he did this song called Everybody's Talking. And that song got snapped up and they put it on that movie, Midnight Cowboy. They got Harry Nilsson to sing it. And basically, from that point on, Fred had a steady income. Okay, so Fred really, I'm not saying he's a billionaire, but he probably didn't have to work hard after that if he didn't want to. So we mentioned Fred's a peculiar, difficult man. So he had this strong aversion to the concept of selling out. And he may have gotten that from hanging out with the jazz people that he did hang out with. He hung out with Lenny Bruce as well. So, you can get some of that kind of acerbic, anti-establishment wit and that disdain for hypocrisy that Lenny Bruce had. Fred was really, he didn't want to be famous. He did not want to be famous. And I don't think he was against success, but he also wasn't really for working for it very hard. So apparently, there was some drug use, and Fred would pop back and forth between New York City and Coconut Grove in Florida, where he would kind of dry out. And there was a great club down there called the Gaslight where he could play. And while he was down there, on one of his jaunts down there, he really became interested in dolphins. And there's a bunch of conflicting stories. Like, some people say he actually somehow met up with the actual dolphin actor who played Flipper in that 60s TV series and got to know this dolphin like very well. And they developed a kind of a camaraderie, a relationship. Also, he met a guy who worked at this place called the Seaquarium down in Coconut Grove. And after his gigs at the Gaslight there, those two guys would piss off and they'd open up the aquarium and Fred would go in there and he'd just bring his guitar along and he'd play for the dolphins until all hours. And Fred was absolutely convinced that these were intelligent animals and that some kind of communication is possible. And maybe music was a great way to communicate with them. And he was also absolutely adamant that dolphins should not be in captivity. Dolphins are people. He was absolutely adamant that dolphins should not be in those aquariums. And basically he formed a charity, a benefit, a movement called the Dolphin Project, which that was their goal in life. And basically from that point on, Fred would not do music except if it would benefit the Dolphin Project. So he still played. He would play down there in Coconut Grove, and sometimes the stars would come down, Joni Mitchell would come down, Stephen Stills would come down, and they'd do a couple sets, and it was all cool. Other people, Johnny Cash begged him to come on to the Johnny Cash show. Absolutely no way. Other people just begged him to, they wanted to play with him. They wanted a piece of Fred on their record. Stephen Stills apparently actually got Fred to do some singing on his second solo album, but Fred refused to let him use his name. So if you look on the Stephen Stills second solo album, there's this guy called Fearless Freddy, and that's it. So there's lots of other guys and girls who just loved Fred so much. Crosby, Stills, and Nash, when they were going to form their supergroup, their first thought was, we're going to name it Sons of Neal, because they love Neal so much. Neal put the brakes on that one, says, no, that's idiotic. Don't do that. Okay? Of course, we already talked about John Sebastian, Love and Spoonful, all that stuff. Those guys were super influenced. Let's talk about Paul Kantner and Grace Slick. Okay, Paul Kantner just loved Fred. And let's kind of set the Wayback Machine to August 17th, 1969, Woodstock, 8 o'clock in the morning. Jefferson Airplane walks on stage. They're all like fucked up on LSD. They were supposed to have been played the previous night, but shit happened. So like they played early in the morning on the Sunday. What's the first song they do? The Other Side of This Life by Fred Neal. And that is frequently the first song of their set. So I read a lot of shit into this. I don't know if maybe I'm just crazy, but the first song you pick to play in front of the biggest crowd you've ever played is Fred Neal's song. Cool. And then there's those other weird ass Jefferson Airplane songs called like the Ballad of You, Me, and Pooh Neal. Well, guess who Neal is? Yes, sir. You guessed it. Neal is Neal. Fred Neal. And Paul Kantner kind of loved Milne and Winnie the Pooh, and he loved Fred, and he thought they were kind of yin and yang. Like Winnie was so innocent and naive, and Fred was so kind of big and angry and world weary, and they were like a little yin yang thing. And he used that word, Pooh Neal, and I think 2 different songs. So there you go. That was on Bathing at Baxter's. Let's just say that Fred loved taking people out on his boat and just to bring a guitar. And he had different ways of playing the guitar to the Dolphins. And everybody who went with him came back a changed person. And they were convinced. And basically, if you went out on the boat with Fred and you came back and you knew those Dolphins were intelligent and interesting creatures who could communicate, who could love, who appreciated music, folk music. So I'll leave you with a quote from Jerry Jeff Walker, the great Texas kind of folk country blues guy. And he said, "Fred's an endangered species. He's just trying to keep from getting caught and made to perform at SeaWorld." So, Fred, here's to you. I'm going to try and do Shake Sugaree, which is an Elizabeth Cotten song, because it is International Women's Day, and it's a song that Fred did, and I'm going to, my version is kind of like Fred's, and I'm going to try and make sure you can see my fingers this time, okay? So you guys be good, you take care, and we'll talk soon. Bye. 2, 3, 4. Got a little secret, shouldn't tell. I'm going to heaven in a split pea shell. Oh, Lord and me, didn't we shake Sugaree? Everything I got, stunning pawn. On my watch, on my chain, I'd sell myself, but I'm so ashamed. Oh, Lord and me, didn't we shake Sugaree? Everything I got, stunning pawn. I got a little song, won't take long. Gonna sing it right if it takes all night long. Oh, Lord and me, and didn't we shake Sugaree? Everything I got, stunning pawn. Got a little secret, tell. I'm going to heaven in a split pea shell. Oh, Lord and me, didn't we shake Sugaree? Everything I got's done in pawn. Sold my watch, sold my chain. I'd sell myself, but I'm so ashamed.